All right, this is week 6, and week 6 we get into a new section of the course. So we began the course with this idea of just basic questions about morality. Where does it come from? Is morality just a matter of opinion? And if so, is it individual or cultural? Or are there some values and principles and behaviors and characteristics that ought to be followed by everyone? We then moved into egotism. We talked about radical egotism, where you're just completely self-absorbed. And we also talked about egotism that, maybe it's too selfish, you're too into yourself, but you're not radically egotistic. It's not like you're the only thing that matters. So we looked at that through a number of case studies. Then we talked about Pascal and this idea of starting from self-interest and moving ultimately to a traditional form of morality. Well, we begin this week in the third section of the course are moral theories. So the third section of the course is based on moral theories that essentially say, look, here's how you ought to live. Here are the behaviors, or here are the choices, or here are the decisions that are moral. And these theories try to systematically tell you what is right and what is wrong. And while these theories may take account of self-interest, they're not based in it. So essentially they're going to tell you, here's what you ought to do. Maybe it's in your self-interest, maybe it's not, but it's still what you ought to do. And so we have these moral theories disconnecting right and wrong from self-interest. It's not that the moral theory is always absolutely opposed, contradictory, the objection to the moral path, but it is saying there's no necessary connection. It's not necessarily the case that doing what is right is going to be in your self-interest. Okay, and so this week we have reading from John Mazzoni, Ethics the Basics. You have the chapter on utilitarianism, 81 to page 102. You've got your 3 discussion board posts. Actually, I'm going to add a 4th discussion board based on the review video, and you can create an objection. Not many people do this, and I do encourage you to do it. Not only to watch the review video so you can kind of internalize and get further reinforcements about the material in the course, but also because it's good practice. It's really important that you create objections and that you work on it, because this is where a lot of students struggle. So again, as long as you get your 4 full posts, you're good. And this past week, we did have a number of people that went down, and some people that went up, but the posts were, oftentimes a little skimpy, not fully developed. So it's 5 or 7 full sentences, substantial sentences. I agree is not a substantial sentence, or way to go, or good point. All those are kind of remarks, but they're not substantial sentences. So at least 5 to 7 substantial, well thought out sentences. That's what you're aiming for. Last week was a little poor, especially based on what the quality of work you guys had done in the discussion boards earlier in the course. Okay, the first short assignment activity. If you've already given me back your Excel sheet, you're good. If you want to talk about that Excel sheet, if you want to go over, your grade, I would absolutely love for you to come and talk to me and make an appointment, and let's do it. The midterm exam. The midterm exam is an electronic exam. It can be taken anywhere between now and the following Tuesday, February 23rd, 11:59 p.m. So get that done. There is going to be some readings on Mill about that. That's a little bit of an addition, which I will send to you. And we're going to focus on Mill more next week, but if anybody wants to take the test this week, that reading is part of it. And so I will send that out to you. And now, what are we talking about? What's the first moral theory we're going to study? It's utilitarianism. And essentially, if you boiled utilitarianism down to a single phrase, it would be make the world a happier place. Utilitarianism is what ethicists would call a consequentialist moral theory. Right and wrong is based on consequences. The basic idea with any consequentialist theory is to produce more good consequences than bad consequences. Utilitarianism says the consequences you should produce are pleasure. That is a basic drive. It's a basic desire. It's what all human beings want. We want to gain pleasure and we want to avoid pain. And when we translate pleasure and pain into different terms, you're happy when you're feeling pleasure and you're sad or unhappy when you feel pain. So the utilitarian is essentially saying, look, produce more happiness, produce more pleasure. The person that makes the world a more pleasurable place is a good person. The person who makes the world a less happy place, the power just went out, unfortunately, but we have this battery backup on the computer, so I can still record, and there's still some light. But the person who makes the world a more painful place, a less happy place, that person is the bad person. And so, make the world happier, not less happy. Now, what are some of the key principles here? I can't get into everything, but I'll try to give you some of the basics. One of the basic principles is that you count too. The idea is to make the world happier, and that means you think about who is affected by my action. I'm affected by my action. Maybe I'm the only one. And if I'm the only one affected by my action, and it makes me happy, then I should do it. But if other people are affected by my action, let's say I take a lower paying job, my family could be affected by that. And I've got to assess, maybe I'm made really happy, fulfilled by this lower paying job, but by bringing in less money, it allows the whole family, it prevents the whole family from living the kind of lifestyle that we want, or that would be really enjoyable. And so maybe it's the case that I shouldn't take that job, because even though I'm going to be less happy, when you look at the whole picture, when you kind of calculate and add up everybody's happiness or unhappiness, there would be more happiness produced by, in this case, doing something that would make me unhappy. There could be other situations where absolutely I'm made happier, the family's made happier, everybody affected by the situation is made happier, and so in that case I should do it. It'd be more clear. So while utilitarianism says you may have to do something that makes you radically unhappy, maybe you have to ultimately sacrifice yourself. You maybe have to throw yourself in front of a bullet. For example, if you could save someone who impacts society more. Even though your happiness can be radically diminished, even though you could suffer death by doing the utilitarian right thing, overall, as long as more happiness is produced, that's good. That's moral. That's what we want. When we talk about who's affected, well, utilitarianism affects every single decision in your life. For example, do you eat meat? And we're going to study this a little bit more next week. But depending upon where that meat came from, you have to ask, was the animal in pain? If so, to what degree? What amount of pleasure am I getting from eating this piece of meat? And if the pain of the animal is greater than the pleasure I get, then I shouldn't do it. We should also think about future generations. The idea with future generations is, look, maybe we could live up the high life, we could be rich, we could enjoy luxury, but we're doing so by borrowing from future generations. And those future generations may have to one day really suffer in turn when they have to pay it back. Their lifestyle may go down. And so a utilitarian would say, I've got to consider that. I've got to think about that. And again, there's no absolute right or wrong. No single action or no single quality or no single principle is always right or always wrong. It's just what is making the most happiness. So for example, there could be cases where you imagine murdering someone could produce happiness. Maybe if you murder someone who would drag society down, or you murder a rapist, or you murder a serial killer. In that case, murder is right because it would produce more happiness. Maybe greed or selfishness in a certain sense, in a certain time, produces more happiness. At other times, not. So maybe there could be times when being generous is good, produces more happiness, times when it's not. And so you always are thinking about the context. You're always thinking about who is impacted, to what degree, how are they impacted, and that's how you make your decision. You're always, always, always thinking about the consequences of your decision. The action, the principle, the behavior is not intrinsically, inherently, always fundamentally right or wrong. It's only whether that action, principle, behavior, rule produces more happiness. And if it does, you should go for it. So that's some of the basic principles of the theory, and you'll get a chance to explore that through this video, through the lecture notes. Read the lecture notes. I encourage you to do so. Through reading in the Mazzoni and the discussion boards. I look forward to some great discussion boards, some better discussion boards than the last week. And as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to call or email or come to my office hours.